they're both as important as others, because you've got, without the people, there's no company, right? So, if you're going to cause chaos internally by the wrong person, that leaks to customers, and then that causes you problems externally. So the culture fit is as important as the skill set.
All right, we're back, and we got Tom on. And I gotta say, Tom, a lot of your content, especially just written content, it seems like that's your preferred method, has really resonated with me. I don't know what it is, but it really feels like you get behind the scenes talking to business owners and getting kind of that those real insights, that those conversations that only happen behind closed doors. So before I get into some of the topics, it would be good to introduce yourself. Everybody kind of knows you from the recruiting side, but really what your start was and how you found yourself in this position.
Yeah, so long story short, we have focused on exterior envelope for 10 years, and we moved quite aggressively into the North America market probably 3 or 4 years ago, and then moved into specialist contracting and product manufacturing. And most of our work now is within that immediate space. So we're doing some good stuff. I'm glad it resonates. I'm trying my hardest. But yeah, hopefully there's some advice there that people can look at.
So I saved a couple of your favorite posts, or my favorite posts of yours, and I'm gonna um, quote them and then ask you to dig a
Oh
little
God.
bit deeper. So this one recently: good owners are rare. If you find one and they can develop you, back them. So you did a little bit of a breakdown as it relates to what makes a good owner and a bad owner. But specifically, I think the definition of that really changes based on size and scope of the company. The owner of a 40 to $50 million business looks very different than a 200 to $300 million business. So is there an area where you find you specialize or resonate more with the owner, or are you working across the board?
Yeah, probably, we work across the board, but in terms of where we see a huge transition period is that when professional management is needed, and it's got, the owner's usually fastest to everything. They get result, they're well networked, they drive pace, and then operations need maturing. There needs to be real structure. There needs to be real visibility. Real KPIs pushed through the business, and the owner's usually just not the person to do that. And it's usually kind of 50 million plus when professional management starts coming into the business. It can be earlier, depending on the margins, but that's the shift really. And if 50 million plus, and you start talking to these professional management, and then you start talking to CEOs that start to realize their skill set, or owners that start to realize their skill set, and they start bringing in these operators, that's when businesses tend to kick on. The ones that fight and like wearing the cape. And we see it from both a candidate side and an owner side. And that's kind of why I try and go at that angle, because, we're seeing some really amazing success stories and then some absolute fires because the clashes happen.
I would think working within a family business structure is more challenging. Do you enjoy it? Or is that is that haunting to you?
In terms of when we're supporting family businesses.
Yeah, I mean, when you're working with a family business, especially a second, third generation owner that's
Oh yeah.
looking to develop that succession plan, maybe has an idea for it, but doesn't really understand the commitment and time and energy that's required to actually successfully implement that.
Yeah, because if you think about like the experience that professional leaders have, it's over like what, 15 to 20 years, and they, even longer in some cases. So then the hardest thing is when you've got your kids coming through the business, and they're trying to put these kids in leadership roles, and they're just not ready. And then it just, in terms of obviously driving the business forward and then prematurely promoting, that just causes its own issues. What I've seen recently is that they're involving the successes early with operators, and I'm very, very transparent with the operator and being, look, your job is to drive this forward. Your job is to help mature. It's a family business. We're not going to lie to you. The children one day are going to run this place, but I need their skill set to be in a place where they can. And the task in professional management with bringing the successes through, and that's working really well. But yeah, it brings its own challenges.
Where do you see the biggest challenge in terms of maybe senior leadership or those seasoned professionals that have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years in terms of allocating, just alleviating themselves a certain responsibility and giving agency to others to step forward in those roles? Do you think it's a lack of confidence in their staff, or do you think it's ego driven and part of them enjoys having that control of the business?
Both, definitely both. I think there's some instances where it's, to find real capable operators that are really going to drive businesses forward is tough. And when you look at some of the margins, and I think we spoke about this briefly, is some of the margins in particularly exterior envelope is scary. So it's tough. But then at the same time, owners tend to like wearing the cape. They like being the ones that put the fire out, that's coming up with a solution, that is involved in everything because he can't let go. And there's usually so much identity in the business of where the business has come from. Then sometimes they're their own worst enemy. And if we could mix the right operator with the self awareness to bring people through, then businesses could really really kick on.
Especially in that family business dynamic, do you find maybe a father trying to push a son or mold a son to be a certain persona or live up to certain responsibilities that they just don't have the inherent skill set to do so? And in that instance, I mean, what does it look like when they introduce somebody else to sort of take on that leadership role, and a little bit of maybe the internal competitive dynamic that may unfold?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've also worked in some with some businesses where the son or the daughter have really kicked the business on, and they've grown it from, like, say 30, 40 million to 100, 150 million, and that's because the father got out of the way. So in other cases, they've really kicked it on. But in terms of an individual coming into that dynamic and a professional manager coming into that dynamic to I suppose sit in between the children and the father, um, it's really really tough. And it's usually a certain type of profile that will do it. When we're talking to execs, we're going at execs that have worked for, they prefer family businesses or PE businesses or public businesses or whatever it might be, and they're all different animals. They all tend to prefer a certain dynamic, and that's where they get their value, and that's because they are self-aware.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, especially with you mentioned margin erosion, particularly with businesses struggling. I mean, I've even seen local domestic businesses here that have been in business for decades, and a lot of them are closing doors. So just due to the rise of competition and globalization, you do see that margin erosion. So when you have new contractors entering the market and they retain you to try to help them find talent, do you think are you setting the talent up for success? I mean, like how do you basically compete with that boots on the ground business that's just had that family ownership in place for 20, 30, 40 years? They have the trust, they have the reputation. How else can competition get into the market without just completely eroding or cutting their margins?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of how we would develop a new market, is that where you're going with? And so a new
Yeah.
market for a contractor it's based around that statement hire. So if that statement hire is well connected with GCs, is well connected with people in the market, they've got 10 to 15 years in that space that you're trying to get into, that's how you can get above. But in terms of how quickly that happens, that's where people tend to come short, because if you're expecting, let's say for example, you're operating in Florida right now, you've got no presence in California, you like you like California because the buildings are exactly your usual product, in terms of what you're targeting. Just dropping someone in that space and expecting them to perform is just not going to work. So when we're starting to build leadership teams, it's about presence, it's about contact, it's about how long they've been in that space. And where is a good point, actually, because what a lot of companies do, they just drop a sales guy who's got no operational know-how in terms of delivering projects. They've got, oh, you've got loads of contacts, but a company's, yourself, the companies look a lot deeper than that now. How are you going to deliver a project here when you're not here? Who's going to be the person on the ground when it goes wrong? So there's a lot of development that we try and do with the owners in terms of how they're going to approach new spaces.
And when you're working with clients, and obviously you work with individuals trying to help them find opportunities, but I'm sure you have certain companies that you've had long-term relationships with. And so is it typically like a one-off placement, or is it a long-term project or commitment where you place a leader and then you help them try to find project managers, operators, engineers, and so forth to really build out that team?
So we would do the exec search where we put a leader on the ground, and then we'd usually get really involved in strategy. We don't really CV fling. So what we'd do there is we'd sit with the owner, we'd understand the position that they're trying to recruit for, the markets they're trying to get in, and then we would work from a managed service perspective of plugging into their HR growth and plugging into their strategy, their people strategy. So we're ahead. And then when they're starting to tackle new markets, we've already pipelined talent, we've already developed talent for them. And then suddenly it's not that scary as you start to grow outwards.
Some of those more old school operators that are looking to pivot or open up to new means of management, or adopting or developing a new company culture, do you see more adaptation or open-mindedness to remote work in terms of maybe having something like engineering or estimating performed offshore, or even just having remote employees to help build out that team? Because particularly when you're siloed to a specific location, it might be very tough to find very deep talent pool within.
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing more of it, and especially when you look at the cost, particularly in the US. We're really building overseas engineering or looking at outsourced partners for manufacturing. Obviously tariffs have put some some to bed, but absolutely, and it's quite refreshing that people are starting to look differently on how they're attracting talent, and that's either US and US serving US, or Europe serving US, or further afield. And people are really starting to open their mind that talent can be global.
Yeah, I think yes, but I think it's a very slow burn and process. It's really tough finding those companies that have stood the test of time. It seems like in this industry, you see people come in and go. It feels like you go into select markets and there's only really like a handful or less of contractors that have continued to be reliable and continue to survive and
Yeah,
thrive. Um, so it's a tough industry. I'm surprised you've lasted this long.
yeah. It's I mean, we know it, and we work with a number of the key players. But you're right that people are finding it tough right now. And I think what is standing people out is the ones that are looking at how they're attracting the right people. They're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at how they're diversifying products. They're looking at how to diversify markets. You know, I'll give you an example. Canada, for me, my biggest market for probably for 3 years. It's now our quietest. Um, and hopefully it'll get busy again next year. But that's just one example that we just can't rely on one market. We've got to diversify, and in my opinion, contractors have got to do the same.
So when these contractors that you've worked with consistently over multiple years, 1 to 5 years, whatever it is, when they see operations scaling down, revenue going down, or margins eroding, what do you see their immediate response to be? We need to downsize? Are people acting in panic mode? What seems to be the mode of operation at this moment? Are a lot of people pivoting to different areas of the industry, or different products, or different geographies?
Yeah, we definitely, well, personally, like the last 12 months, we've seen people really looking at diversifying. So some of the large unitized schemes might not be as common as they used to. So people are starting to look at, the smaller unitized projects, or so their project values might drop from, you know, 60, 70, 80 million to be looking at the 20, 30 million pound unitized projects, or they're looking at stick, or looking at panels, or they're looking at diversifying into modular wall, whatever it might be. People are really pushing into new products. And then if majority of their work was, New York, for example, we've helped a number of contractors move out of New York down to Florida or into the Midwest. And so people are really looking at like, okay, well, we've got a great product, we've got a great business, but if that market dries up, then, we've got to be in places where our backlog continues to grow. So we're doing a lot of diversification. That's probably been the theme for 12 months. So we've not really seen people make too many cuts or slow down growth. It's people going, okay, well, I need to protect this. I need to make sure the business has got different opportunities to win backlog.
do you more so now than in the past, or I don't know if maybe you'll answer that it's remained the same. Do you think people are, especially in that leadership type role, long-term oriented? Are they looking at this as a long game and understanding they're going to start at a new company or market and it's 3 years minimum plus before they really see that traction? Or do you see people continue to bounce around every 2 years? Because I see these leaders placed in new positions or companies or geographies, and 24 months later, I see, oh, it's the end of the road. I'm going here, and I feel like they get to that inflection point and they miss. It's like they have to reach that max pain or capacity before they see the next step, and they don't actually see it through.
And that's the hardest thing for an owner, right? Because they're looking at these execs and going, well, okay, you're going to take me through a change management piece. You're going to start to develop operations, and then you're going to get $10,000 increase on your base, and you're going to jump in 2 years. So you've got to look at it from an owner's perspective. Why would they invest all this time, money, and give somebody the keys if 2 years down the line they're going to jump out? So that does happen, but at the same time, there's a certain period where an exec's got a value as well. That might be a big restructure. That might be a high growth initiative. That might be a big change management piece, or that might be building a structure to lift an owner out. So there might be a 3-year period where that exec's really valuable. Then he might go, do you know what? I'm not the guy to take you. I've took you from 40 to 60. I'm not the guy to take you from, or girl to take you from 60 to 100. I've done my bit, and you'll get somebody better than me. So I do a lot of that as well, particularly within the PE space, where I'm going to come in for 3 years. I'm going to take you to X EBITDA. I'm definitely not going to be the person past that. But obviously, if there's an event in 3 years, I'm the individual who's going to take you to that. So it does change depending on the circumstances.
Okay, so that's an interesting sort of pivot point before I get to the next topic. So do you, especially in this industry, you'll hear a lot of long-term operators say, I've never seen the PE route successfully implemented or work long-term in this industry. It's usually a matter of organic growth or growth through acquisition. And a lot of the times what initially built that business's reputation in the marketplace was, very hands-on service by a select few partners or business owners. And then as you scale quickly, considerably with the PE pressure on the back end to generate certain numbers, revenue, profitability, it's like, how quickly does that level of service get diluted? So have you seen sort of a successful PE trajectory? I'm sure the answer is yes, but maybe in multiple circumstances implemented in this industry?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you're right that it's got to be the right PE and the right strategy. If they're coming in to go, okay, well, I want a 3-year shift from X to Y, doesn't really happen. It's the PEs that have a longer term strategy, that are willing to hold stock, that are willing to take it on the journey. And again, your point there about the reputation's usually been built by the owner. So they're extremely well networked. They're out with clients constantly. They're the ones that put the fires out, and that's the shift that I think this industry really struggles to do, is alleviate some of the pressure from the owner. And that's why the succession plan for PE going into this business is so important. Each deal that PE completes, they've got to put a real in-depth succession plan around the owner, because if the owner and his black book have gone and his reputation goes with him, it suddenly becomes quite difficult to replace.
So let's look at it from both ends, from the candidate and from the owner's perspective. But to start with the owner, let's say you're working either with the PE firm or ownership, and you're looking for some member of new leadership, whether it's from sales, operations, or just oversight perspective. What are some of the green and red flags you should look for in a candidate? And what is that? How would you work with a client and outline that vetting process?
So if I was an owner in contracting, I would want somebody that's got stickability. And what I mean by that is, okay, listen, you stayed with that business that went from 30 to 60 mil. What about when the markets slowed down? What about when it was tough? What about when there was an example recently, the tariffs kicked in? What about when the gravy train stopped? What did you do? Have you just jumped out at the first possible opportunity? And if you can dig a little bit deep and you go, yeah, okay, they have, then they're not going to be the person, because if you're going to invest your company's growth, they've got to be able to ride the wave. And there's going to be some really, really good times, but then there's going to be some real tough times as well. And somebody that can take you back through the tough times and get you back into the growth trajectory, those are the people that you want. And also, it's so frustrating for an owner when they are paying somebody an executive package and they feel like they're doing the job for them. So how are you going to manage me out? How are you going to give me confidence that I can trust what you're doing? And I don't need to be involved. I don't need to be over your shoulder, but how are you going to give me visibility, the way that you're changing my business, the way that you're taking my message to the employees, the way that you're making sure that my employees that have worked with me for 20 years are looked after, they're communicated to properly. How are you going to give me that confidence? Because if I'm paying you X, I am not going to be stood over your shoulder, because I need to be adding value elsewhere. And if they can start to navigate that and how they're going to coach you and how they're going to develop the business around you and still give you that visibility without being in the weeds, then you're not a million miles away from being in the right place. It's when their first response is, "Oh, we kind of do it together," or they don't know how to coach an owner out. If somebody's going into an owner-led business, how are you going to coach me out?
And they can answer those questions however they want, and they can pitch the perfect script. But does that then go back to getting referrals and interviewing past clients, or just doing as much due diligence as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And references from clients, references from people that have worked for them, how they've coached, how they've developed, how they've led, and then references from previous owners. Ideally you can get as close to current role as possible, and then people that maybe have been in leadership positions that you reported to that have retired or whatever it might be. But there has to be a very, very clear picture that this individual knows his numbers, because an owner knows them, or knows their numbers. Sorry, an owner knows their numbers. So if they don't know the numbers, they've got no substance, at that level. And then 4 or 5 different angles of how they have led, because that's going to be really, really important that an owner's legacy is looked after.
I don't want to assume your answer, so I'll ask, what do you think is, from this type of leadership or ownership perspective, what's more important, the internal company culture, or I call it the external culture, or that feedback or interaction you're getting with the customers in the market?
Both. They're both as important as others, because you've got, without the people, there's no company, right? So, if you're going to cause chaos internally by the wrong person, that leaks to customers, and then that causes you problems externally. So the culture fit is as important as the skill set. And I've got it on previously. I've put a 500 mil leader into a 80 mil contractor, and it was a disaster. And it cost a fortune to replace. And luckily the owner trusted us from previously, and we managed to sort that out. But we've got to be so close to the culture fit, because if you're working for a public group and you're suddenly dropping into a much smaller privately owned or family business, as you alluded to, if it's not right, it's going to cause serious problems.
It's interesting, because I thought you were going to say internal culture, and I got this wrong at the beginning of my career. I didn't put as much emphasis on it or understand the significance. And in your position, if you're bringing forward a leader who says, I know all the big players in this market, I have a Rolodex of business, I'll get you immediate introductions. If they don't jive with the internal company culture and get all that sort of glue and cohesion and everybody working together, they'll never be successful, because for sustainability in this industry, as we said, it's all reputation based. But they can sell the first job, but if you don't deliver it, you're not there to fix the problems, boots on the ground when they come up, you'll never get the next job. And so it's a good answer that it's both. I think you have to have the army backing you, but they have to be willing to continue to step up day in and day out over the long haul.
Absolutely. And the fit with the owner is so important. If you're sat in meetings for hours and hours and you just do not like the guy, or girl, it's impossible. And
yep.
So that the fit, that immediate chemistry with the owner is so important.
Okay, so let's look at it from the other side, not the owner. Now, from the candidate's perspective, you've successfully scaled, own companies. Maybe you're looking for something bigger. Either you're moving for your family, the work situation has a change in control, and you're looking for a different opportunity. How would you view the market? How would you view opportunities? How would you remain open-minded and not assume you know everything, or you know what you know? Be open to the fact that there's other things out there. So you're that candidate. You approach Tom. You say, "I'm open to a new opportunity." What's the first step?
Yeah, so we need to deep dive on fit, what you're actually looking for, because we had a situation this morning where Tom, you've gone quiet on me, and I go quiet on execs on purpose because I want to make sure they reflect. So yeah, I'm looking, but if they, we've all had bad days where you go, I want to jump out on this, they're driving me mad or whatever it might be. So they've got to reflect, they've got to be serious, and post that, and we deep dive into exactly what they want, the current revenue levels, the current bottom line, the current headcount, the project values that they're taking on, that would really get into the capability within that business. Have they managed outsource engineer, whatever it might be. And then we can start, okay, well, look, these are the companies I want to talk to. Are you comfortable with that? Is there any red flags, anything I need to know about before we go to market? And if there's not, we can start talking to them. If there is, we'll hold. And then we'll explain obviously we can explain the fit before that, make sure that everybody's aligned. But again, I tend to, particularly in contracting, because it's quite a privately owned driven market, manufacturing is different, global public companies. But in contracting, we really try and know the owner, because if we can find you the best shortlist in the world, but if they do not fit with the owner, we're not going to get past stage one. So we really explain the good, the bad, and the ugly about the owner. And the kickback from candidates is usually the same. Where are they in terms of letting go? Where are they in terms of, self-awareness of the good, the bad, and the ugly? Like, what do they need around them? Are they a developer or are they the operator? Because usually ties into the individual we place. And then my favorite question is these: have they got any other businesses to stop them meddling? And if a professional manager goes into a business where the owner's got 2 or 3 businesses, and because they're usually the same mindset, right? They usually need to be busy, they need to be active, the type A personalities. If they've got other businesses and they're not looking back and getting involved in operations, then the change management curve is a lot easier because the owner's not coming around to legacy employees and getting in the way. And they're very, very similar questions on every call.
So what you just said reminds me of, I got to go through your, I was going to say tweets, but they're not, their posts. Everybody wants the top job until they get it. So inherently, without it turning into a therapy session, although that's really what's going to happen. How do you help people discover what they really want? Because I feel like you want to be head of sales, you want to be head of operations. That sounds great. But then when you're actually in it and you realize the pressure that entails, I mean, I started on the consulting side of this industry, and you were there to help diagnose issues and raise red flags. But when you're on the contracting side and your ass is actually on the line and you live it and it's on you, you start losing sleep. And so I think it's easy to glamorize or not overlook the fact that the grass is always greener. So how do you help people really establish what it is that would make them happy?
Yeah, so I mean, we do a lot of calls with, okay, Tom, you post about senior management, and how do I push my career on, and how do I get to that point? And it is a deep dive. Well, why do you want to be into a senior leadership role? Where are you now? What's the type of responsibility you've got now? You're managing 3 people, you want to push into managing 25, 30, 40, 50, okay. And then, so we dig a little bit deeper. And if the drive's there, the fact that they can take pressure, and the fact that they, are self-aware to continuously learn, we'll start putting a path together for them. But in terms of the common case is a VP of Ops wanting the president role, or a VP of Sales wanting the president role. Well, right now you're in charge of operations. You get that president role, you're in charge of sales. You've got to feed everybody in those operations. Or you're going to be working with your VP of Sales, and you've got to make sure that every department's fed. You've suddenly got to put a HR hat on. So you've got HR, you've got Ops, you've got Finance, you've got Sales. Do you really want that? Because that's a big old job, managing 5, 6, 7 different skill sets that's not necessarily your own. And then the sales individual has got freedom to to client smooth, to constantly feed the top of the funnel, to be out and about, not tied to the office, whatever it might be, to suddenly, you're in the presidency, you're running operations, you're running people, you're running HR. A lot of the commercial guys that go into senior leadership, they can't understand how people heavy those president seats are. And suddenly it's just people, constantly people. It's, hiring, it's, unfortunately it's firing, it's development plans, it's putting out fires. They can't get over how people heavy it is. So we dig a lot on that. And usually when you're mature enough for a president role, you know your skill set and you know the value that you're going to add. And it's quite an easy conversation.
Do you think it's glamorizing? Because the way you just pitched it doesn't sound too appealing. And there's a reason why there's one president, for an entire company. But I think it definitely requires a certain skill set and personality without a doubt. Have you seen people prematurely placed and then seen them acknowledge, look, this is not for me, I got to go back to my area of specialty?
Absolutely. We see it all the time, and I put a post out not long ago that that's actually not a step back. If you're self-aware and aware enough to know this is not for me, that's great. And usually, if you've got a proven pedigree with that company, they'll move you out and go, fair play, we've tried it. For me, I don't want to run my operations. I'm not patient enough to sit in ops meetings and so on. There's much better operators, and I've surrounded myself with operators on purpose. And we see the conversation that we'll have with owners is that really know your skill set, but the people around you need to complement you. And then as a candidate, if you're going into the wrong role, like dig deep before you go into that role. Because you said earlier, you put somebody in the top job to then say, I've got to step you back. It's quite hard. In fact, it's very hard. And that's why a lot of people lose good people. But if the candidate's self-aware enough to go, no, it's not for me. I want to get back into a commercial seat, and they know that. Yeah, it's a tough conversation, but hopefully we can save good people from leaving companies where they've got a lot of pedigree.
All right, well, Tom, this was awesome. Your posts are great. I think these, if I could show you my screen right now and how I highlighted your posts, it's certain headlines stuck with me. So where can people find you if they're interested in working or having a conversation?
Yeah, to LinkedIn, hopefully. Hopefully it's getting a bit more visible. And obviously if you go to our Lignum Group website and drop us a note there, we're attentive, we're on it, we drive pace. So I'd like to think we'll get back to you pretty quick.
Great. Thanks again for coming on, Tom.
Cool. Thanks, Adrian.
Take care.